when you look at companies, and there's certainly a growing number of them who have set forward net zero targets, Paris-aligned commitments, and so on, we're interested in really understanding how they will employ decarbonization pathways.
Joining me today is Khalid Husain, Head of ESG with Cohen Steers. As an asset management firm with domiciled funds products that are in scope of European regulations that seem further ahead, how has this impacted how Cohen Steers integrates ESG into its process?
Certainly. So we've noticed an increase in the number and scope of ESG regulations and policies worldwide, and we think that will continue to be the case going forward. So the European Union, and specifically the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, or SFDR, has really impacted us in a number of ways. One is it's reinforced and accelerated the need for us to more explicitly incorporate binding criteria into our investment process. We've had an ESG integration element for a number of years to our investments, but we think there's an opportunity to balance portfolio construction with specific ESG criteria. And so, for instance, with the transition of 4 of our funds in Europe to Article 8, what we're really trying to do is to promote environmental and social practices and also good governance. To be more specific, we're targeting companies in our 4 funds that have a higher internal ESG score, in some cases also an internal E&S score than the benchmark. We also want companies that are not in violation of UN Global Compact, that are avoiding the most severe controversies. And then finally, also, we're targeting companies that have climate mitigation commitments and targets.
Now, when you look at companies and investments, what are some of the best practices that you seek regarding human capital and DEI, and how do you value these and other S issues more broadly?
The way we assess companies on these fronts is really through a mix of some quantitative metrics and numbers, such as employee turnover rates, employee satisfaction, tenant satisfaction levels. But then we're also really looking towards the culture of the company and how diverse and inclusive they are. Do they have certain targets and commitments in place?
And obviously here at REITworks, as well as in the news, there's been a lot of discussion around the SEC's proposed rules around climate disclosure, which are still in flux and, of course, subject to be challenged. Any quick thoughts on how you evaluate companies in terms of specific emission objectives and actions beyond this potential mandated disclosure?
Certainly, climate risk is an important but complicated topic. Very quickly, I would just note a few things. One is we're interested in greenhouse gas emissions trends over time, what those numbers include. So for things like Scope 1 and 2, it's fairly straightforward, respectively, any owned combustion, purchased electricity. But then when you get to Scope 3 numbers, it gets complex because essentially you're trying to scope out the scope of Scope 3. And that can include everything from tenant energy consumption, embodied carbon, visitor travel, and so on. So knowing what's included in Scope 3 is the first question. I think more broadly, when you look at companies, and there's certainly a growing number of them who have set forward net zero targets, Paris-aligned commitments, and so on, we're interested in really understanding how they will employ decarbonization pathways. And so what that means is, what sort of OPEX and CAPEX will need to be deployed, what's going to be the return and payback on that investment, how will tenant demand be shifted over time, what sorts of properties will they be investing in or not over time. And so ultimately it's a mix of those things. And then finally, how does that all relate to overall corporate strategy and capital allocation?